Welcome back to another episode of the Emerald City Gridiron Podcast, Seahawks football simplified and amplified, where we discuss everything Seahawks related. And today we're going to talk about training camp and what I've seen from training camp and, players that have been standing out, some positional battles, give some awards to players that have been standing out and, just discuss my notes, on, what has happened at training camp. And obviously, where we could start with is the big topic of Jadarian Price and how he is going to be, how he's going to fit into this offense, has been a big question mark going into the, training camp, with his usage rate at Notre Dame playing behind a fellow first-round pick, Jeremiah Love. He didn't see a bulk of the carries. We didn't see a lot of pass catching from him when he was at Notre Dame, and some question marks that people had with him. And I think going into this training camp and what we've been able to see is not only is Seattle putting him out there a lot with the ones and the twos and seeing what he could do, he's been able to answer the bell every time. He's been able to show off his shiftiness. He's not a very big break tackles and make you miss. He's more of like a weaver. He's been able to looking at my notes, he did a lot of catching out the backfield, whether it's in the flats, whether it's 30 yards downfield. He's showing a lot of those things that people have question marks on, when it pertains to his pass catching out of the backfield, which was such a big dynamic that K9 was able to bring to this offense in, being able to not only be a dynamic runner, is be able to catch the ball out of the backfield and make plays. And during training camp, Jadarian Price has been doing a lot of that, and Seattle wants to see where he is as a pass catcher. Now, naturally, he's had, a couple drops, a couple missed opportunities, but he's been able to also show his versatility in many different ways. One of them being yesterday catching a 30-yard bomb over the shoulder in the end zone by Jalen Milroe, which is something that you like to see, especially letting K9 go. You want to see what Seattle's going to be able to get out of him, and I think he's been able to do that. I think Seattle's been putting him out there, putting him in positions to show that he can be, he could be a starter, or he could be, somewhere similar to like how Charbonnet and K9 were. I know they're high on Halani, but Jadarian Price is your first round pick, and he's been showing every opportunity that he's been able to do. He's stacked multiple days now he's stacked multiple days having good practices, and that's something that you love to see out of your first round pick, being able to show your shiftiness, be able to show your speed, because it's one thing that there was another thing that people talked about with him coming out of college is that how fast is he. There was just a lot of unknown because he wasn't able to fully get that spotlight with playing behind Jeremiah Love. He also adds a, returner ability. I don't think Seattle's going to be, needing him to return kicks with Horton and Shaheed. But, he's been stacking days now, showing his speed, showing his ability, to cut and maneuver. He had a play where, he was very K9-esque, where he was able to, read that the play wasn't going and cut back and make something happen. He's been answering all the calls to the point where, you have Ernest Jones talking about him, talking about how he's very mature for his age, that, he's a dog out there. So that's something that you love to see from your first round pick, and one of those would transition us to our next topic here is one of those positional battles that you see, because they've talked about their how high they are on a George Holani, who we were able to see in limited fashion last year, and then they sign Emmanuel Wilson, who's also had some good days. He's looked explosive, powerful, everything that you'd want to see. He's labeled as a type that's very similar to Zach Charbonnet, someone you can get in the red zone, and with Charbonnet being down, that's something that Seattle's going to look for. But Emmanuel Wilson has been able to also stack a couple practices where he's looked good. He's been able to show off, whether it's catching a pass out the backfield and taking it for some yards, whether it's able to show off his his shiftiness and his burst. Him and Jadarian Price has been able to stack days and really put it on Holani, who's looked solid. He just hasn't had those big, highlight plays like Jadarian Price has been. And another one of our positional battles that has actually really been heating up is corner. You let Reek go to Philly, and I think you feel good about that. I think the last couple of years, especially last year, coming off the season that he had, I think you feel good about letting him go. And adding some change. You bring Joe back, and so now, you wonder what Witherspoon's going to be, if he's going to be on the outside or if he's going to stick back in. Nicky Minwori starting the training camp on the PUP list. Devin's been spending most of his time on the inside. So Pritchett has been able to, be the other outside corner, being the one that is most familiar with the system. And now Pritchett hasn't looked bad, but there are some rookies and a vet that Seattle brought in that are definitely knocking on that door, to create a real, positional battle. I think Neal has looked good. He's been able to show off his size and frame. He's had some, PBUs. He's been getting some reps with the twos, a lot of the reps with the twos. He got a little banged up, so, he missed some time yesterday. They'll have today off. Pretty sure it's more precautionary. They haven't said anything about it being anything serious. A vet like Noah has been able to come in and stand out during mini camp and OTAs and, starting to get more comfortable in this position. You have Dansby. Dansby's been a player that's been able to stand out a lot. He's had some turnovers in minicamp and OTAs, back-to-back good days. Ending practice 2 days ago with a interception in the end zone, and then yesterday's practice having multiple PBUs, including one that caused a pick six by fellow rookie Bud Clark. So for a 7th round pick out of Arizona, Michael Dansby has been able to, put his name out there and put his position, put his, his name in the positional battle. Now, I don't think that, if you're Neal or Pritchett or, someone that's getting there, you're, starting to worry about your, job per se. But for Dansby, being a 7th round pick, it's all about stacking days and putting good film out there, especially when you have a rookie corner in Andre Fuller who hasn't had a bad training camp. He hasn't got beat or looked bad. He just hasn't had the highlight plays. And as being a 7th round pick, having highlight plays is something that is something that's going to have you stick out, to coaches and to the staff, that can help, add for you to be able to make this roster. So a guy like Michael Dansby standing out is something that's good, for the player. That's something that you want to have, but it creates a real, positional battle, which is, I'm pretty sure, something that, Mike McDonald loves, being the character that he is. He wants to, see and get the best out of you. And for a guy like Nehemiah Pritchett, who has kind of looked rough, last year he had some spot starts. He, obviously he had that highlight against Marvin Harrison where he was just able to tip the ball out. But other than that, most of the times when he gets in his spot starters, he's been able to get taken advantage of. And then you have a guy like Noah Igbinoghene who is coming in, and former first round pick, hasn't been able to quite live up to that stature, but was able to build off of something in Washington the last 2 years, and is someone that John has been wanting to get. He wanted to get him last year. He was able to get him this year. He's had a good training camp, has been able to stack it. The cards are against Nehemiah, as someone that has been very rough on him. You want to see some good days. So hopefully when the pads come on, you could see him, kind of stack more. But I do think there's a very good, cornerback battle that comes in. And, when you draft 3 rookies and those rookies are playing or, that are showing out in training camp, as a defensive, as a defensive coach, Mike McDonald is loving the fact that those players are standing out. And in the secondary, that being a perfect transition to be able to transition to the safety room, you have Ty Okada, who is getting the bulk of the starting reps next to Julian Love, building off of a year that he was able to have last year. Coming in for Julian Love and playing well. He's getting most of your reps next to him. Now with Nick Imawari being out, DeAnthony Bell, who was also in that safety room last year, but then got picked up by Carolina at the end of the year, Seattle was able to bring him back. They even gave him a ring for being a part of last year. He is more of that bigger body safety that can play in the box. He's good on run support, so he is getting a lot. He is getting a lot of those, reps there. But then you have Bud Clark, who is that ball hawking safety that Seattle drafted to be in that position of Kobe Bryant. He had 15 interceptions in his college career at a TCU. He is someone that is going to be able to come in and do that, and he's had a good camp. He's been able to stack a couple of days and show off his versatility, showing off his center field ability, be able to play at high safety, be able to play a little bit of the box. He's kind of had to tamper things down, with his energy, but that was a question mark that coming out of college, they question his tackling ability to be able to be a consistent tackler, and he's a willing tackler, and you could teach that. I think that is something that has been good, and he was able to finish off camp, being able to get or finish off one of the finishing plays in practice yesterday, getting a PBU, taking it to the house, and talk is talk, So that is something you want to see, because you draft Bud Clark and you bring in Ty Okada, and there was a question mark on what was going to be able to happen when you let a guy like Kobe Bryant walk. But you love to see a rookie like Bud Clark come in and be able to make his impact. I think with his personality and the way that he plays the game, I think he's such a perfect fit in this defense. And then you have a guy like Rodney Thomas, who was a multi-year starter at Colts, could play multiple positions in that DB room. He had a solid day yesterday too. He had a specific play where he was able to really read the route as a defender and get a nice PBU. So there, between the cornerback room and the safety room in that secondary, there's a lot of positional battles that you love to see. That you love to see these guys go out there and compete and see what you can get out of those guys. They offer a lot of different positional value, and that's something that Mike McDonald loves in his defense. And our last positional value, which is probably the least of like the worst, because you have so many of them locked up, is who's going to get that last wide receiver spot, because you have JSN, you have Shaheed, you have Horton, you gave Bobo a contract this offseason, and you have Cooper Kupp, the vet, who is still out here making one-handed plays at practice. And so usually, Seattle will carry about 5 to 6 receivers, and you let Derek go. He goes to the Raiders. You drafted Emmanuel Henderson, who had great, he had a great special teams ability out of Kansas. He could play gunner. He can return the ball. He adds a lot of positional or a lot of ability in the special teams, something that Seattle very much values on their team. He gives you a lot of value there. Ricky White, who was also a good special teams player last year that you drafted, he's had himself a good day yesterday, probably his best day in training camp. Was able to snag a touchdown and get a couple other completions. You have Cody White, who's been on the team on and off. He was able to make the 53-man initially last year. He's bounced around from the 53 to the practice squad and everything. He had a good day yesterday, catching a touchdown, showing that, every time that, his number gets called, he can answer the call and, show up. So, there's going to be a battle for that last wide receiver spot. And even guys that were on the practice squad, Montreal Foster, practice squad player last year with the Seahawks, caught a touchdown pass today. Rashad Rochelle, an undrafted rookie that they signed, had himself a good day 2 days ago. So that last wide receiver spot is very much up for grabs. I think a guy like Emmanuel Henderson or a guy like Cody White are definitely players to look out for. But that doesn't mean the guys aren't going to show up and do that. And I think highlighting those guys highlighting those guys, or just highlighting in general, is a perfect segue to highlight some guys that are just having a good training camp overall. Guys to talk about that are making these highlight play are just standing out. And I think we could do things like I like to give out hustle awards, guys that are just putting in the effort and showing out at training camp, which was a guy like Michael Dansby. A guy like Michael Dansby, a 7th round pick, out of Arizona. I think Seattle might have some thoughts of maybe moving him into a nickel, being a smaller corner. They drafted 2 corners that are big body corners. Michael Dansby is a little bit smaller of the 2. But you could see that, he had his play in the end zone, for example. He got a beat a little bit, but his ability to recover and get his hand in on the play, which caused a PBU and a touchdown for the defense, with Bud Clark snagging it and running it in for a pick 6. I think a guy like that, who's been able to stack good days, getting an interception of his own the day before. I think a guy like this obviously gets, a hustle award for someone who's a 7th round pick and was able to come in and stack a couple good days. I think another one that you would be able to give that to is Jalen Milroe. Jalen Milroe had a good day yesterday, probably one of his best days. And the reason why, even if it's not like he's had some bad days or like some horrid days. He's had some, not so good days. He's had some okay days. But, like a day like yesterday really shows the grit and grind that he was able to do in the offseason because of the throws that he was able to make. He is known as a dynamic runner and is someone that holds on to the football a little too much. But being able to make some of the plays that he was able to make yesterday, he counted for about four touchdowns. Even the one that he had, the touchdown that he was able to hit over the shoulder to a Jadarian Price was a beauty of a ball. We know that Milroe has a arm. He has a leg. It's just putting it all together. Some of the throws that he had, the anticipatory throws, the accuracy that he was able to display in these drills was something that you love to see because of the age, because of the athleticism, everything that Milroe is. You love to see him put that together, because last year he looked a little sloppy. When he was able to play in the preseason, he didn't look very good. When they tried to get some gadget plays for him, were probably one of the worst plays that Seattle had. last year. So, you love to see him be able to stack those days together. I don't think there's going to be a QB2 controversy anytime soon, but you love to see that, out of a rookie that was raw that you wanted to develop. And now just wrapping up some things from training camp, some other things that I was able to see in my notes. You got some guys back that are healthy. Horton was able to come back and not be on the PUP list. He came back. He played in some team drills. He did some blocking, some pass catching. He's been, doing some one-on-one things, some, off to the side things. He's doing a lot of things that it makes you excited to see because, Horton, only being able to play 8 games last year, had 6 touchdowns and was able to, notch out a pretty good role. And we weren't able to see, what he could look like in this offense, with a guy like Shaheed. And I think it's very, exciting to see what this offense could do if Horton can stay healthy, because he added such a dynamic, to this offense, whether it was, special teams, whether it was being a deep threat. He just found a knack, or he just had a knack to find the end zone. And I think him starting off training camp healthy, and, building off of what he did last year, another year in the system, could make this offense so much more lethal. And health, another guy is AJ Barner, having shoulder and ankle surgery in the offseason, starting off this year healthy. He's been doing some things, at training camp. He's been, making some plays. He just looks in good spirits. It's good to see, off of a season that he had last year. He wasn't, touted as a real receiving threat coming out of Michigan. He was more of a blocking tight end. But being able to build off that season and come back, he's just such a good, he's just such a good dude, high energy, so that's definitely something else that you love to see. We could stay in the tight end room. I think Elijah Arroyo has had a good camp. I think he has showed off his speed. And what you saw out of Miami, I think being able to get him inside the numbers and be able to show off, that speed would be such another dynamic weapon that you can get in this pass catching group. He's had a couple touchdowns, via one of them being Derek Hall guarding him. Derek Hall is a lot of things, but I don't know if you really want a guy like Derek Hall guarding Elijah Arroyo. But he was able to, show off his speed yesterday and snag a touchdown. He has been able to another guy that's been able to stack days and show a lot of good things. And I think, him coming off of a season where, Barner was such, a solid tight end, and then, Elijah Arroyo at the end of the year, gets banged up. I think it would be such a good thing for him to keep stacking these days and show, another dynamic, because Seattle right now is just stacking players. While we're on the topic of stacking players and building off of last year, you see this chemistry with Sam Darnold and Shaheed starting to form. And I feel like that's such an important thing, because coming off of the trade with Shaheed, you weren't able to really see that form, that connection build, that you thought you would be able to get with Rashid. You saw it in the special teams, but you never saw you didn't fully get to see it with Sam and Rashid. You saw some missed opportunities and everything, and there was a play where you saw Shaheed be able to beat Job, and Sam fit it into him in the bucket in the end zone. Some slants that you've been able to see, just them getting on the same page is such a key thing, because a guy like JSN is just such a pure receiver, and he is it's like poetry out there. His route tree and the things that he's able to do. A guy like Cooper Kupp that's established in this league, a vet and everything. But what you could do with a set with JSN on the outside, you have Torrey and you have Shaheed. Those are your guys that could really go deep. And you have a guy like Cooper Kupp. You have a guy like Jake Bobo that could really eat up the middle. You have Barner that has been able to show that he could be a complementary piece in the pass game. And then you have a guy like Arroyo who has been able to, show, or hasn't been able to show that speed, but you could see that speed continue to build. And I think the weapons for this offense could be endless as long as everyone's, starting to, stay healthy and build off that chemistry. And I just think that's going to be such a big dynamic for this offense. And then the tight ends, with coming from a former tight end coach, new OC Brian Fleury, you've been able to see this heavy tight end personnel on the field during these practices, and I can only imagine how that's going to be, because Seattle has an abundance of riches at the tight end. You really enjoy what you're able to get out of a whether it's blocking or passing out of AJ Barner. Elijah Arroyo has came along more as a blocking. He's praised himself for his ability to add that to his game. We saw what Saubert could do in the blocking game, when he's able to get his opportunities, a la 2-point conversion via the Rams. A guy like Nick Collerup, who was on the 53-man last year, is a monster in the block game. You get a Nick Van Nett back, who Seattle fans know. With us, I think they have an abundance of riches at the tight end, and adding that to their arsenal, and the ability with the pass catchers in this offense, I think is going to add such a dynamic offense and an abundance of riches for new offensive coordinator Brian Fleury to be able to come in and add his own flavor to. A couple other things that I was able to see while I was out there was, I think the D tackles have been shown. I think Riley Mills looks great. I think he's explosive. He is powerful. I think being able to build off of the small, he missed majority. He was only able to play in less than a handful of games before, the postseason happened. And then you see the sack, being able to take his man and then essentially tackle to get a sack in the Super Bowl. Is one of the things that I think when Seattle looked into the offseason, why they wasn't so worried about having to go get a lot of free agents, because they knew what they had in-house. And I think, Riley Mills being fully healthy, having a full off season to really get into this defense and then you even have guys like Leonard Williams that are, giving him some of their opportunities so that he can really flourish in this defense is not only a testament to a guy like Leonard Williams, but it's just such a good thing to see how he's going to integrate himself in this defense. I think Byron Murphy has looked great. I think he was snubbed of All-Pro, Pro Bowler. He is a great defensive tackle. You have a young duo in just those two being able to, just show the brute force they have, their arsenal to be able to pass or rush the passer. Brian Murphy, prides himself on being able to rush the passer and not only, just stuff the run. And then even a guy like Brandon Peely's had a couple plays, to show out, and be that, a rookie. Devin Eastern started the off season on the PUP list. So, him and rookie, him and the other rookie Uso Somalio are really the only true nose tackles out here. But we saw what a guy like Brandon Peely was able to do last year. So I think building off of that is off of those years, or off of last year, is such a I keep saying this is just such a good thing to see. Other things is like Ernest Jones. Ernest Jones has been a great leader out there. I think he's such an underrated person. We've seen from the, if you got something bad to say about my quarterback, just the person that he is, and how he's been out there, the things that he's been able to, instill. I think it's not a coincidence that when he was able to come to this defense was able to change dramatically. I just think that, I could talk glowingly on Ernest Jones, forever. I think, he's just looked great out there. And then, the only other real, news was, and it sucks is Kenny McIntosh being cut, off of that injury that he sustained last year. started the training camp on the PUP list, and I don't know how that's going. I know he hasn't really done a lot of things off to the side. You're seeing Zach Charbonnet, who had an injury, way after he sustained his injury, doing things on the side. It's reported that maybe he's ready for the beginning of the year. I don't know about that. It sucks because I like the things that K-Mac was able to do. He added a different dynamic with pass catching and a different tone that he was able to set, in there. So, maybe there's a future down the road for K-Mac, but, obviously, that sucks to see a guy like that, be cut, but sometimes that's just how it is, he just wasn't able to stay healthy, and Seattle pulled the plug on that. Following his him being cut, they put Velus Jones full time at running back, which is where he's been at with the running back room anyway. But they put him at wide receiver. Now he's back in the running back room, so no additional transactions on that. But yeah, that's what I've been able to see at training camp. Those are my notes and everything. So I appreciate you guys hanging out with me today. If you guys like what you guys hear, please like and subscribe. It is the best way to make our community grow and everything. I appreciate you. Thanks for hanging out with me, and go Hawks.